For some reason, the science always seems to be doomsday in Ontario, and our prolonged school closures prove it. In this video, I'm going to attempt to unravel why that may be by referencing a letter sent to Premier of Ontario Doug Ford by various presidents of various teachers' unions who would never let a good crisis go to waste as they strong-arm their way to political gain. For Rebel News, I'm Tamara Ugolini, and one thing is for sure, that there is a lot of drama between the Conservative government and teachers' unions. But the facts remain the same. Ontario students have faced in-person learning disruptions longer than any other province in all of Canada. And, for instance, this National Post article says that Ontario Premier Doug Ford may well be responsible for more lost school days than any other head of government on the planet. And after 2+ years of solid data, we know that school closures cause more harm than good. And that's on many accounts, such as learning gaps and falling behind. But it's the shadow pandemic that's really concerning, the extreme mental and emotional fallout that we can't even begin to comprehend. That these policies and closures will have an effect on the children of our future. And that is why I launched a campaign at backtoclass.ca, because school closures cause harm to kids the most, and someone needs to give them a voice that this isn't a sound fallback policy. So what gives, Ontario? Why is our science different? Well, it comes in the form of highly politicized unions, of course. See, early in May 2021, Ford mentioned casually during a press conference that unions were going to file injunctions against him if he reopened schools. Afterwards, at least 2 unions snapped back and denied the claim that it was their posturing that was responsible for keeping schools closed. But could that have been reality? Let's look at this letter sent to Doug Ford by, again, various unions on December 31st, 2021. It urges Doug Ford to reduce class sizes to promote physical distancing, increase effective vaccination rates by publicly promoting the importance of vaccination for students, prioritize access to booster shots for all educational workers, add COVID-19 to the list of designated diseases in the Ontario regulation designated diseases under the Immunization of School Pupils Act, that's the ISPA, which I should also note doesn't contain recommendations or mandates for flu shots. Anyway, improve ventilation and install HEPA filters in all classrooms and public spaces with publicly available air quality metrics and standards. Ensure the non-fit tested N95 mask orders by school boards are filled and delivered immediately. I don't know what the point of an non-fit tested mask would be, but I digress. Provide the best possible masks to all students with improved guidelines to ensure masking compliance. I'm pretty sure there's a lot of parents and teachers who actually want to see the masks gone completely, but nonetheless, implement stricter screening and isolation requirements. That seems to not be happening. Implement a more robust testing and contact tracing regime, which includes providing all education staff with regular access to rapid antigen tests and prioritizing PCR test accessibility for both education workers and Ontario students should they register a positive result on their rapid tests. Oh, those free tests we hear so much about. Reconsider the short-sighted decisions to decrease the isolation period from 10 to 5 days, as doing so unnecessarily risks reintroducing the virus into school settings. They go on to recommend that the government also reduce capacity rules in every other indoor sector, enforce vaccine passports, and masking in all indoor places. So the teachers' union is now making general health and safety recommendations to the Ford government, and it signed yours truly, Karen Brown, President, Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario, Bob Dobrowolski, President of Ontario English Catholic Teachers Association, Karen Littlewood, President, Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation, Mike Morgan, Chair, Ontario Council of Education Workers, Warren Smokey Thomas, President, Ontario Public Service Employees Union, Anne Vinay Roy, President of one of the French unions, Laura Walton, President, Ontario School Board Council of Unions for CUPE, And they sent that via email to Christine Elliott and also Stephen Lecce, who is the Minister of Education, Christine Elliott being the Minister of Health. And then there's the Ontario Families Coalition, a parent-led nonprofit organization that advocates for kids in school. They have retained a lawyer to challenge the constitutionality of school closures until kids are back in school permanently. Some key notes from that letter are that school closure orders violate the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Section 7 and 15, by discriminating against children and depriving them of security of the person. They note that COVID policies disproportionately affect disadvantaged and marginalized populations, namely those with disabilities. The letter continues that the clients being represented are pleased to hear that schools will reopen on January 17th, but are understandably skeptical of the long-term commitment by the Ford government to keep schools open after 2 years of rolling closures. And then later down in the letter, they note that they are prepared to initiate legal action should the government once again backtrack on the reopening plan, as schools closures are no longer an acceptable policy response. Between rotating strikes that began in November 2019, long before pandemic lockdowns and restrictions, it means that Ontario kids have been missing out on their education long before knee-jerk school closures. And the unions remind me of that old give an inch, take a mile manifesto, like that book, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. That's where that little mouse, he just wants one cookie, but then he inevitably needs some milk. And then he needs a straw and a napkin, and then he needs a mirror and a hair trim, and, well, you get the picture. By the end of the book, the mouse has sent this poor person spinning with endless requests, only to come back and need another glass of milk and another cookie. So, Premier Doug Ford, what will it be? Endless union requests whose own members say that they have never been polled or asked for their opinion? Or the group of concerned parents ready to challenge your constitutionally questionable closure orders? The buck stops with you. For Rebel News, I'm Tamara Ugolini. That campaign that I mentioned at backtoclass.ca, it's a petition that you can sign to express your displeasure with school closures. And you can also do a one-click politics. So it's an email campaign where you can send a form letter to your Minister of Education and your Premier, letting them know that you don't agree with the prolonged closures of schools. All of that information and my very well-sourced initial report can be found at backtoclass.ca.